Uh, there's a question that I want to frame our time this morning in Isaiah 6. Do you know the real God? Do you know the real God? Not a fake one of your imagination, not a God that conveniently fits into your personal value system, not a God that seems to make your own cultural perspective look really good and all other cultural perspectives look hopelessly misguided. But do you know the real God? You know, sometimes we're not actually that good at spotting the real thing. Deep fakes are getting better and better. Logan Paul is a YouTuber and a WWE professional wrestler, and he's into Pokemon cards. And at one of the peaks of the Pokemon card craze, he spent $3 million for 6 first edition Pokemon cards still in their wrappers, and he posted this on his YouTube channel. The people online watching said, you know, something's not quite right. The packaging didn't fit. The Pokemon experts said this. And there's something wrong with the barcodes, apparently. They really focused on this. So Logan Paul opened the packages, and inside were not Pokemon cards, but G.I. Joe cards. Not worth $3 million. They were fake. The most expensive shot of whiskey ever cost over $10,000. A Chinese fantasy novelist, Zhang Wei, bought the shot in a Swiss hotel, and it's the Macallan, if I didn't say this right, the Macallan 1878 Scotch. And Mr. Zhang, he bought the shot while on vacation in Switzerland with his grandmother. But when Scotch experts, and again, how does someone become a Scotch expert? I think I missed my calling in life for that one. But when Scotch experts read about the story, they descended upon the hotel and determined through chemical analysis that what's labeled as a Macallan 1878 actually dates from the 1970s, which makes it not worth $10,000 a glass. The most expensive painting ever sold was the Salvator Mundi. It's a painting of Jesus holding a crystal ball thing by Leonardo da Vinci. And it was sold to the Saudi prince Mohammed bin Salman for $450 million. The most expensive painting ever sold. There's just one problem. Art historians are now pretty confident that Leonardo da Vinci did not paint the Salvator Mundi, but one of his assistants maybe painted it. It's not the real deal. It's $450 million wasted. Now, I doubt we're the kind of high rollers who would ever or could ever, drop millions of dollars on Pokemon cards or Da Vinci paintings. But maybe we are afflicted with the wrong view of God. That the one that we say we worship, and the one that we worship, and the God of the Bible, that they may not be the same thing. And Isaiah pulls back the veil and shows us the real God, which makes us ask, do you know the real God? Well, so who is the real God? Well, first of all, he's so holy that you can't describe him. He's so holy that when we talk about him, our language fails to capture reality. This passage is often called the call of Isaiah. It's when Isaiah is commissioned as a prophet. And it's unusual that it would come here in chapter 6 rather than in chapter 1, which is when most of the prophets are called. It's Amos or whoever he's called at the very beginning, and then after that is what he says. But here it's kind of after the action has started, which either means that Isaiah has had a preaching ministry before the big call as a prophet, or chapters 1 through 5, which we've been in the past few weeks, have been kind of his literary introduction, kind of setting the scene before he tells his own story here in chapter 6. But either way, chapter 6, it looks backwards and forwards. It looks backwards and explains in chapters 1 through 5 of why is there any hope at all? 1 through 5, it's all the bad stuff. How is there any hope? Well, this speaks to that. And it looks forward. It's like in the next few chapters, it's why are the people just so stubborn? Why do they refuse to listen to this guy? Well, it says something about that. And what it shows, first of all, is that God's holiness is so overwhelmingly powerful that he's beyond description. You can describe him a little bit. And what he is the true king. Look at verse 1 again. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Uzziah had been a good king in terms of competent leadership. So that's one of the things when mayor elections, governor elections. Can you pass a budget? Can you run a tight ship? Can you provide for the national defense? Are you competent? Well, Uzziah was that. He was reliable. He was kind of the boring leader that you want. That's who he was. But now this capable king is dead, and at the same time, there's this foreign power, the Assyrian Empire, who are getting more and more aggressive and militaristic. And so, what now? What do we do now? So this is what Isaiah sees. Uzziah is gone, but he's not. He wasn't the real king all along. The Lord is. He's sitting on a throne, Isaiah sees. Like, who sits on a throne? Well, kings do. And verse 5 calls him the king. He's the Lord of hosts. He's the king. Sometimes it takes the death of someone or something that we depend on, like a dream or a job or a politician. It takes the death of that to realize that all along our true source of hope has been God himself, that he's the real king. But as soon as he describes God as the king in this heavenly vision, the best he can do after that is to just describe all the things around God in the temple. So he can describe the train of his robe that fills the temple, or the hem of his robe. It's the bottom part. It's like one scholar says, so he's on a throne, and Isaiah kind of lifts his eyes, and he gets to the bottom part of his robe, but beyond that, there are no words. He's unable to see, unable to describe. He sees the bottom, but that's it. He can't describe what's above, but he can also describe the heavenly beings who are serving around the Lord. So verse 2, above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. The word seraphim means fiery, so I think we should envision these angelic beings who have the appearance of fire. They are winged things that are fiery, whatever that looks like. But even then, notice they have wings that cover their face and cover their feet. So even they are not allowed to look directly upon the one at the throne. And even they are covered lest they be exposed to the one who would look upon them. And look at what they're doing. Verse 3, and one called to the other and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Holy, 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 3 times holy. I mean, he's absolutely holy. He is perfectly holy. There is no other thing, no other being in this universe which is holy, holy, holy. Holy means it's separate from what is lowly or merely earthly, merely human. It also means moral perfection. It means like every kind of perfection. The perfection of God as in his moral purity. Any purity that you can imagine, that's who he is, perfectly. And it says the whole earth is full of his glory, or maybe literally the fullness of earth is his glory. Yesterday we went to a game at Soldier Field, a soccer game, and as we're leaving, it's sunset or just past sunset, and the sky is just absolutely brilliant. So the cityscape of Chicago is kind of just lit up by this gorgeous summer sunset in Chicago. The earth was full of his glory. But it's not just the spectacular, it's even the mundane. Every blade of grass, Every breeze of the wind, every drop of rain is declaring the magnificence of the one who made it. That's what the seraphim are like and what they're telling us. So Isaiah, he can describe the bottom of God's robe. He can describe the seraphim. And there's also, he can describe the scene in the room, verse 4. And the fountains of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. Smoke in the Old Testament symbolizes God's presence, but it's also, what does smoke do? It obscures. This is one more element where that it shields his view from a full vision of God. He can't really see everything that there is to see. A few weeks ago, my family vacationed in northern Michigan in Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lake Shore, and it's absolutely spectacular. You have to go if you can. It was once voted on a Good Morning America poll as the most beautiful place in America. That's where it is. And what it is these magnificent, like huge sand dunes along the eastern edge of Lake Michigan. So I can tell you that, but after that, I can't really describe it in a way that does it justice. How could I explain to you how blue the water is? How could I convey the immensity of the dunes other than by telling you that it took, one of them, it took 45 minutes to climb back up to the top after we went down to the bottom? How could I describe the sensation of climbing to the top of one dune and then expecting to see Lake Michigan, but instead seeing like range after range of more dunes, maybe like a mile until you actually got to the lake. My words fail me. It's so beautiful that I can't really describe it. And Isaiah is saying that God is so supernaturally holy that words fail you. Words fail him. You can say a little bit. You can talk about what's around him. But when you try to say something of the real God himself, as he really is, he clams up. What do you say? I want to ask you, what would change for you if your vision of God was this big? Would your life be infused with a seriousness that maybe it lacks now? You think, like, this is the God who made me? Like this is the God who stands behind everything and holds all of reality together, even the reality of my own small life. Would it infuse you with seriousness, or would it put your troubles in perspective? It's not that it would make your troubles go away, and not that it would make you feel silly for worrying about them, but that you'd see the real king as he really is, and his overwhelmingly big size would somehow make our own problems feel less overwhelming. But who is he? He's so holy that you can't really describe him. Second, he's so holy that you can't stand before him. Isaiah's first response to this vision isn't wow, it's whoa, and not W-H-O-A, but W-O-E, whoa, trouble, bad. Verse 5, and I said, woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Isaiah has two problems here. He has unclean lips, and he identifies with a community of unclean lips. Unclean means impure lips. But why lips of all parts of you that could be unclean? Well, I mean, Jesus said that everything that comes out of your mouth starts in your heart. Everything that comes out of you is just a product of what's inside you in your heart. So to have unclean lips is to have an unclean heart. But it also means that Isaiah is not at this point worthy to join in with the seraphim in saying, holy, holy, holy. The uncleanness of his lips would soil the declaration, you see? In other words, Isaiah says, I don't belong here. When we were on sabbatical in England, We love seeing all the churches, all the ancient burial sites. It's for a history buff like me, it's just a dreamland. Well, there was one medieval church that it had like a church building and some well, like a water well next to it that had some connection to some saint some time ago, and it was about a half a mile from our place that we were staying, and I assumed it was for public viewing. As much of England's historical places are for public viewing, you get to go and you get to look at it and enjoy it. So one day, two of my boys and I we rode our bikes there, and we get there and there's a gate, but the gate's unlocked, and so we open the gate and we go in, and we're looking around for like 5 minutes or so. We're just kind of walking around, and then a lady comes out, marching towards me in absolute fury. Excuse me, what are you doing here? This is private property. And I try to explain, well, we didn't realize that we were here. We're just here to see the beautiful church. We're not here to do anything bad. We're just looking at it, and we didn't realize it was private property. And they said, well, how did you get in? Well, through the gate. Well, wasn't it locked? No, it wasn't locked. We really didn't mean to break any rules here. And so for an uncomfortably long time, I'm trying to express our apologies and assure her of our good intentions and get out of there, all while she is giving us an earful of how we don't belong there. And Isaiah feels that way. I'm not supposed to be here. And we need to understand two very important things about every human being. So every person, no matter who he or she is, this person is created in God's image, and so is beautiful and precious. That his or her life has a value that is incalculable. Secondly, though, that every person is on his or her own is unclean, as like Isaiah, and unable to stand in the presence of the absolutely holy God. Before God, we don't really belong. So something has to be done for Isaiah. Verse 6. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. His uncleanness is atoned for. He's forgiven. His unclean lips are no longer unclean. They are clean. He can speak now. Well, how? It's by a coal from the altar. What is the altar for? It's for sacrifice. A sacrifice has been made for him, and that sacrifice has to touch him for him to be clean. You see? One of the most scandalous things that Jesus did was physically touch unclean people. He put his hands on unclean lepers. He allowed himself to be touched by the unclean bleeding woman. It was absolutely scandalous. And one of the most radical claims of the gospel is that you actually can stand before this holy God. How? Because of the greatest sacrifice that has to touch you. Jesus is the real sacrifice. He is the real altar place. He is the real sacrifice who washes away your guilt, and he has to touch you and is willing to touch you to make you clean. So yes, Isaiah sees more of God than you and I have ever seen, but Isaiah would also be shocked that you and I have been brought so close. He's so holy that you can't stand before him, and the radical scandal of the gospel is that because of Jesus, you actually can. So, do you know the real God? He's so holy that you can't describe him. He's so holy that you can't stand before him, not on your own anyway. But third, he's so holy, and you have to listen to him. This holy God calls out to everybody, and you have to listen to him. Isaiah's lips have been cleansed, and so now he can be God's mouthpiece. Verse 8. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me. This is Isaiah's calling. And it's not just the calling of a prophet. It's not just the calling of someone like Kristen called to a particular place for a particular reason. This is the calling of the church. Our mission is to speak God's word to the world. But what qualifies us for that job? It's not how religious are you, it's not how spiritual you are, but it's that you have been cleansed by Jesus, the better sacrifice. That's all it is. So all we are saying is that grace has found us, and it can find you too. That is us. That is our church. That is the church's call. But this message is going to fall, for Isaiah especially, on a lot of deaf ears. In fact, Isaiah has been commissioned by God for ministry that's going to do more hardening than saving. Look at verse 9. And he said, "Go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." In other words, Isaiah, your job is to say, hey, Jerusalem, do this. Just do this to me. One scholar, Alec Mottier, says that it's not that Isaiah is supposed to speak in a intentionally confusing way or a cryptic way that confuses people into that they don't get the message. But he's saying that Mottier says, he in fact faced the preacher's dilemma. If hearers are resistant to the truth, the only recourse is to tell them the truth yet again, more clearly than before. But to do this is to expose them to the risk of rejecting the truth yet again, and therefore of increased hardness of heart. In other words, for people whose hearts are already not inclined to listen to him, what's going to happen is that they are going to be more solidified in their hardness. That's what's going to happen. And that's not a very happy ministry for Isaiah, isn't it? I mean, you would think that after that amazing vision of God and his cleansing, that something happier would be in store for him. It seems that Isaiah himself was hoping for something a little bit more upbeat. Verse 11. Then I said, "How long, O Lord? How long do I have to do this ministry that people just say no to me and say no to you?" And God said, "Until cities lay waste, without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. And the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land." So how long do I have to preach in a way that hardens these people in their unbelief and spiritual rebellion? Well, until there is complete destruction and exile, God says. There's just one little bit of hope, verse 13. "And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled. And then this, the holy seed is its stump." I've mentioned before, I think, that my family owns some property in Alabama. It's a few hundred acres of what used to be a farm, and now it's mainly just woods. And a few years ago, there was a family controversy when my uncle sold the logging rights to part of that land without consulting my dad. And when he sold the logging rights to a company, that land was clear-cut, which means that instead of loggers going through and taking some of the trees, the ones that they need, what clear-cutting is that everything is cut down. Everything that growing out of the ground is cut down, and they take what they want and they leave the rest. And so when they're done, it's just this wasteland of stumps and fallen things and decay. It's a more efficient way to do it. They make more money, but it is absolutely terrible. All that's left is stumps. But when I looked at the land recently on the Google satellite view, and I actually saw some green in that space. Not as much green. It wasn't as full as the land around it. You could tell something had happened there, but something new was growing there, thankfully. Isaiah is saying God's people are going to be like a clear-cut forest, total destruction, but there's new life there too. Out of this stump, there's a holy seed that's there. And that's the remnant of God's people who haven't stopped their ears. And he's going to make them grow. And he calls it's a holy seed. The holy God has planted his holy seed. So yes, there's a lot of hardness to Isaiah's message, or a lot of hardening to Isaiah's message, but there's also going to be new life too. And it's interesting. Jesus understood his own ministry exactly along these lines. His disciples asked him, Jesus, why do you teach in parables? Why is this your preferred way of teaching? Why not just kind of say things, without illustration, just kind of plainly? And Jesus answered by quoting Isaiah here. He said, "This is to further harden people like the Pharisees, whose hearts are already hardened." People, they hear the parables, and they either don't get it out of unbelief, or they do get it, and they say, "No, I don't want that." Jesus is saying, that is what Isaiah said for his ministry. Jesus said, that is true for my ministry too. And Jesus explained, well, why? What's happening? He said, well, why do some people do this? And he says, well, some people, they just don't believe, or they don't care. It's and his message fell on brick walls of deaf ears. And even it's the hardest hearts to Jesus' own ministry belonged to the most religious people. When some secular psychology researchers have looked at why some people they need more than normal faith, but they end up kind of jumping into the deep end of having to do like so much spiritual work, so much stuff for their own creation before their minds can be at peace. And they said that the patient has, in a sense, created his or her own religion where faith is not enough. Rather, he or she requires a guarantee about things that cannot be guaranteed. In other words, Jesus said, "Trust me, just trust me." And some people who stop their ears say, "No, I have to do more than that." That's what's happening. Other people, Jesus says, other people who don't hang on to his word, but they harden their hearts, they do that because life is too hard. Following Jesus comes with a cost, and they decide that they don't want to bear that cost. Jesus says that other people, they harden their hearts to him because their lives are too good. Well, why would I need Jesus if I already have everything? So Jesus says, that's how people hear me. That's what happens. But he also said that there is a holy seed. Not the right people, not the good people, but the unclean people who have been touched by Jesus and made clean only by his grace, that they are like that holy seed. And he said, it's something tiny. It's so tiny you can barely recognize it. But then it takes root, and it grows, and it grows. And he said, that's what the kingdom of God is like. This holy seed exploding into new life. So the question that's framed our time here, do you know the real God? I think it can be put this way. Are you listening to him? Is your heart open to him? The indescribably holy one reaches out and touches you to make you clean, even giving you his life to make you clean. Jesus says, don't close your eyes to that. Don't close your ears and your heart to that. So he's so holy you can't describe him. He's so holy that you can't stand before him, at least not as you are. And he's so holy yet calls you to listen to him. So do you know the real God? I mean, what makes Pokemon cards fake is when you peel off the wrapper and discover that there's something else inside. What makes a bottle of whiskey fake is when you test the contents to discover that what's on the inside is not what it says on the label. What makes a Da Vinci painting fake is when you discover that Da Vinci's hand was never in it. And a God that you can mold into your own preferences. A God who doesn't take anything from you, who doesn't ask anything from you, but who is convenient when you need him, but easy to shuffle away when you don't. Like a senile granddad who you don't want to take out into public. That is not the real God. but a God who is indescribably holy, a God who could terrify us in his perfect immensity while also attracting us in his overwhelming love and mercy. That's the real God. So do you know the real God? Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this little